HOA Karen's family used my farm as a free rental. They didn't know I'd reported it as trespassing. I knew something was wrong the second I turned off the highway and saw my front porch lit up. My Texas farm is supposed to be dark and quiet at night. That's the whole point of a place like this. Crickets, not people. But that evening, flying in from New York to check on the property, I saw a strange SUV in my driveway, kids' bikes dumped in the dirt, and a line of laundry flapping across my porch rail like it had lived there forever. Through the kitchen window, a woman I'd never seen stirred a pot on my stove. A man walked past in a towel, like this was some budget vacation rental. My husband's old ranch coat hung on the back of a chair. My first instinct was pure, cold anger. My second was habit, from 30 years at the IRS. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. A little boy spotted me through the screen door and shouted something in Spanish. An older woman rushed over and slammed it shut, eyes wide with fear. They had no idea whose house they were in, but someone did. Someone had given them a key. Someone with access. By the time the president of our HOA, Brenda, came speeding up the dirt road in her white SUV, I'd already filed a trespassing report. She climbed out in neon tennis gear and said, "Mrs. Vance, you can't just show up like this. There are HOA rules." I smiled under my hat. "Brenda, I wrote the IRS manual on rules. You sure you want to go there? If you like seeing bullies in charge get taken apart step by step, go ahead and subscribe," because Brenda had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't always live in boots and dust. Most weeks I'm in a glass tower in Manhattan, consulting for a tax law firm that likes having an ex-IRS auditor on speed dial. But every couple of months I fly back to Texas, trade the blazer for flannel, and drive 2 hours out from the airport until the sky turns big and honest again. The farm was my husband's before it was mine. We raised our kids there, built the first barn plank by plank, buried 2 old dogs under the cottonwood by the creek. When he died, the lawyers told me I could sell everything, move closer to amenities. I nodded, then quietly put the land into an LLC and kept paying the taxes myself. Some things you don't liquidate. That's why 10 years ago, when a developer came through and turned the surrounding ranches into a rural gated community, I thought it might actually help. Paved the front road, put in a security gate down by the highway, promised managed value, and shared maintenance. The pitch was simple. You keep your acreage and privacy, we keep the riffraff out. For a while, it worked. We had cookouts at the community pavilion, branding days that turned into beer and stories, neighbors who actually waved. The HOA was a handful of older ranchers and one retired teacher who treated the bylaws like a church bulletin. Fees were low, the grass got mowed along the easements, and nobody bothered anybody. Then people started getting older. A few died. A few sold off to out-of-state investors who liked the idea of a Texas spread on their portfolio, but never actually set foot on the dirt. Empty houses gathered dust. The board shrank. Meetings went from full potlucks to 3 people and a lukewarm coffee urn. That's when Brenda arrived. She bought one of the newer builds up by the front gate, stucco, big glass windows, faux ranch chic. I remember the first time I saw her at an HOA meeting. Neon tennis set, perfect blowout, tapping her Apple Watch while old Mr. Jenkins tried to read the budget in size 14 font. "Honestly, if we want to attract better buyers, we need to modernize," she said, snapping her gum. "Professionalize. Streamline revenue. You can't run a community on bake sales and goodwill." Most of the old guard were just tired. When she volunteered for the board, then for treasurer, then reluctantly for president, they handed her the keys, literally, master gate codes, community storage, lockbox combinations for properties whose owners rarely showed up. I watched her gather power the way a thunderhead gathers heat on an August afternoon. At first, my issues with her were small. Emails not answered. dues notices with new administrative fees that weren't in the original bylaws. A guard shack that was always empty even though the budget line for security had tripled. I sent a polite email. Could you please send the updated financials and minutes from the last 3 meetings? Old habit at the IRS. You learn to ask for the paper before you ask any questions. She replied 3 days later at 11:42 p.m. All lowercase. LOL, we're still cleaning up the old board's mess. I'll send when it's ready. Smiley face. That smiley face told me 2 things. 1, she thought I was just another absentee landowner who'd skim and forget. 2, she had never, in her life, sat across from someone who could take apart a Fortune 500 company's books in an afternoon. On my next trip down, I noticed other signs. A strange pickup truck parked outside the McAllister place, even though they'd moved to Florida and listed the property as vacant. Lights on at the old dairy farm that had been empty for years. A cousin of Brenda's seen driving the HOA golf cart like it was personal property. Neighbors started to grumble in that low, tired way people do when they don't think complaining will help. Thought the Millers sold. One ranch hand said, nodding toward a house with a fresh set of kids' toys on the porch. See new folks going in and out, but no realtor sign, no moving truck. I filed the information away. License plates, dates, little patterns. That's the thing about doing what I did for 30 years. You stop believing in coincidences. For a time, it was easy to pretend all of that was just bad management, not malice. Fees late here, a missing gate code there. And when I walked my fence line at sunset, watching the deer slip through mesquite shadows, I could convince myself the community would straighten itself out. And for a while, it looked like maybe we'd finally found peace out there in the quiet. Until Brenda's streamlining stopped being sloppy and started looking like a personal business model. The first time I realized Brenda's modernization wasn't just incompetence, was over something so small it barely registered. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in New York between client meetings when my phone buzzed with an HOA email, notice of violation, non-compliant structure. I opened the attachment on my laptop in a conference room that cost more per hour than my first truck. There it was, a grainy photo of my old red equipment shed. The same shed that had sat in that exact spot since Reagan was in office. According to Brenda, it now violated setback requirements and community aesthetics. There was a line about a potential fine of $50 per day if I didn't submit an architectural review packet within 10 days. I leaned back and smiled. Setback requirements on a shed that predated the HOA by 30 years. Cute, I replied, very politely. Please send me the specific bylaw sections, the original approval documentation you're relying on, and the board minutes where this enforcement priority was discussed. Old habits. 10 minutes later, she shot back. We're standardizing everything. Old structures have to be brought up to code. It's only fair to new buyers. If you have questions, you can come to the next board meeting in person. In person, 2,000 miles away, scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Monday. I could almost hear the subtext. If you can't be bothered, you don't get a say. It was the same trick corporations pulled on low-income taxpayers. Make the process just annoying enough that people give up. Instead of getting angry, I printed the email and slid it into a manila folder I labeled in neat block letters, HOA Brenda. A week later, my neighbor Carla called. Hey, Ellie, you get some weird notice about unauthorized livestock facilities? I hadn't, but she forwarded hers. Same tone, same vague threats, different nonsense rule. That afternoon, I took a long lunch, pulled the original HOA covenants out of my file cabinet, and spread them across my kitchen table like a crime scene. I highlighted every mention of structures, grandfather clauses, enforcement procedures. Nothing about retroactive approvals. Nothing about daily fines without a formal hearing. Nothing about the president unilaterally deciding what was aesthetic. What there was, though, was a very clear section on due process, notice, and equal application of rules. So when Brenda sent a follow-up reminding me that fees and fines must be paid promptly to avoid further action, I didn't argue. I wrote back, "No problem. Please email me the complete fine schedule, last 3 years of HOA financials, and the roster of current board members, so I know who to thank for all this hard work." Her reply took longer this time. When it came, it was shorter. "Financials are internal. Board roster is on the bulletin by the mailboxes. As for fines, we handle that case by case." Case by case. Translation: whatever Brenda felt like that day. I walked down to our building's mailroom that evening out of sheer curiosity. There, on my little Texas HOA bulletin screenshot from a neighbor, were 3 names: President, Brenda Morales; Treasurer, Brenda Morales, acting; Secretary, vacant. So, she was sending threats, inventing rules, and controlling the checkbook. Interesting, I murmured, sliding the screenshot into the folder. At that point, I still thought I was dealing with a petty little grifter who liked power trips and late-night emails. An amateur. That Tuesday, it was just a stupid shed and some bluster. I had no idea that case by case was actually code for something much bigger, and that my empty farm had already been drafted into her side business. Before we go deeper into how far she pushed it, hit the like button so this story gets in front of more people who've had their own run-ins with HOA nonsense, because that notice about my old shed, that was just her first test. The funny thing about power in a small community is it never announces itself with a siren. It shows up as little whispers pinned under magnets. The next time I flew down to the farm, I stopped at the cluster of mailboxes by the gate. Right there, next to the faded flyer for a lost healer, was a bright new notice. Reminder: community standards will be enforced. Non-compliant properties may face restrictions. No signature, no details, just a phone number that routed straight to Brenda's personal cell. When I opened my own box, 3 envelopes slid out. One was the usual dues statement with a brand new administrative surcharge handwritten at the bottom. The second was another violation notice, this time about unapproved vegetation along my fence line. Mesquite trees apparently now needed architectural approval. The third wasn't official at all. No letterhead, just a photocopied sheet, folded once. "Dear neighbor, some of us are concerned about the condition and occupancy of certain absentee properties. Please remember that neglected or unsafe homes affect all our values. If you see suspicious activity, report it to the HOA president immediately so we can address problem owners." Problem owners. I stood there by the mailboxes, the wind snapping the paper in my hand, and watched Brenda's SUV roll slowly past. She didn't look at me, but I saw her glance in the rearview mirror. She wanted people thinking of me as neglectful, absentee, problem. It makes it easier to break rules against someone if you've convinced everyone they deserve it. That afternoon, Carla came by my place with a pie and tight shoulders. "Ellie, I don't know what's going on, but people are talking," she said, setting the dish on my counter. "Brenda told the ladies at Bible study that you've been difficult about paying your share. Said she's having to crack down because some folks think they're above the rules." Above the rules. I almost laughed. Did she say that before or after she doubled her own stipend in the budget? I asked. Carla blinked. She mentioned something about taking on more responsibility, but Ellie, she's been telling folks you let strangers use your place, that she's trying to keep vagrants out, and you keep complicating enforcement. There it was, the story. If anyone saw unfamiliar cars at my gate, they wouldn't think, "Why is the HOA president's cousin staying there?" They'd think, There goes Eleanor again, letting randos crash on her land. Over the next week, the atmosphere thickened. A ranch hand I'd known since he was in diapers stopped mid-wave when his boss shot him a look at the feed store. Two newer wives went quiet when I walked in, eyes dropping to the floor. One of them had a HOA tote bag slung over her shoulder like a badge. When I went to toss trash at the community bins, I found a sticky note on the lid. Please be mindful. Large bulk items may incur extra fees. Some people have already been warned. No name, but my old broken gate post was sticking out of the dumpster like a smoking gun. Subtle, just enough rumors and reminders that if Brenda ever needed a chorus, she'd have one. Emails followed the same pattern. A general notice about owners who fail to maintain acceptable standards that somehow CC'd half the neighborhood, and me, by name, in the BCC line. I know because Carla forwarded me a screenshot. Thought you should see what she's sending from the board account. She wrote, the language was always just vague enough to avoid direct accusation, but pointed enough that everyone knew who was being talked about. Certain large lots near the back of the community, properties owned by individuals who no longer reside full-time. My place, the McAllister place, the old dairy farm. At sunset, I'd sit on my porch steps, the boards familiar under my boots, and watch dust trails on the access road. Some trucks would slow as they passed my drive, drivers turning their heads just a second too long, taking in the problem property. Filing away the narrative Brenda was feeding them. The thing about being an auditor, though, is you learn not to take any story at face value, not even your own. So instead of storming into a meeting and demanding apologies, I opened my worn leather notebook and started writing. Date, time, license plates, exact wording of every notice, who told me what and when, screenshots from neighbors saved as PDFs, photos of the bulletin board, voicemails where Brenda's tone slipped from sugary to sharp for just a second, because every little snub, every gossipy comment, every anonymous note was doing two things at once, isolating me socially and building a pattern of targeted harassment on paper. And the more she tried to make me the villain in everyone else's head, the easier it became for me to make her the villain in mine. A very specific kind of villain I'd spent 30 years dismantling. What Brenda didn't realize was that each whisper, each friendly reminder, each sideways look at the feed store was going straight into a folder with her name on it. The shift from whispers to open warfare came with a number at the bottom of a piece of paper. I'd flown back to New York, thinking I had time to keep building my little dossier while Brenda played petty queen of the mailboxes. 2 weeks later, I opened my email before a client call and saw the subject line, final notice, account in arrears. Inside was a PDF on HOA letterhead, past due dues, $450, violation fines, $1,250, administrative enforcement fee, $600, total due, $2,300. Failure to remit within 10 days may result in lien placement and suspension of property access privileges. Property access privileges on land I'd held since before Brenda had a driver's license. Attached was a statement of account. Every bogus notice she'd sent, shed, trees, trash, had magically turned into a separate fine. Backdated hearing dates I'd never been told about. Board votes that had apparently happened in meetings that didn't exist. At the bottom, in a different font, was a line that made me sit up straight. Partial settlement may be available via temporary HOA-managed occupancy agreements for vacant properties. There it was, in writing. She was literally offering to settle fines by letting the HOA occupy members' homes. No policy, no bylaw authority, just an invented program to dress up what she was already doing off the books. I called the number on the statement. Brenda picked up on the second ring, voice syrupy. HOA administration. This is President Morales. Afternoon, President Morales. This is Eleanor Vance. I'm looking at a bill for $2,300. She clicked her tongue. Yeah, so we've been more aggressive with enforcement. Some people were taking advantage of the system. But listen, there is an option to work it off. You're never there, right? We could place an approved tenant for a few months, credit your account. Win-win. Approved by who? I asked. By the board. I could hear her smirk. That would be me. Look, I'm trying to help you here. Otherwise, I have to start lien proceedings. And once that machine starts, it's really hard to stop. There it was again, that casual threat I'd heard 1,000 times from corporations who thought they were untouchable. Weaponize the word lien. Count on people folding. I let a little tremor into my voice. I'll need to see that policy in writing, and any current occupancy agreements you're already managing, just so my lawyer is comfortable. She laughed. You don't need a lawyer, Mrs. Vance. This is just neighbor stuff. Tell you what, we'll start with a short-term placement. Family, I know, very respectful. You won't even notice they're there, and your balance will be gone. You've already placed them, haven't you? I asked softly. Silence. Then, sharper, if you're behind, you should be grateful I'm giving you options. And no, we don't send around private contracts. That's internal. Either sign the temporary access form I'm emailing you, or we move forward with fines. Your choice. An email pinged while she was still talking. Subject: temporary access authorization. The body was almost blank, just a line. By replying, I agree, owner authorizes HOA to manage occupancy as needed to satisfy account balance. No dates, no limits, no rent amounts, no party names. From her personal Gmail, not the HOA account. I pictured my husband tightening the last bolt on the barn door, telling me, paperwork's where they'll get you if you're not careful. Brenda, I said, come again. I'll review and get back to you. I don't want any trouble. That's smart, she said, triumphant. People who cooperate never have trouble with me. She hung up. I sat there, high above Midtown, the city humming under the windows, and felt something click into place. This wasn't sloppy. This was a system. Invent a fine. Threaten a lien. Dangle HOA-managed occupancy as a way out. Use your master keys and codes to quietly turn people's land into your own rental stock. My shed and my trees were never the point. My empty house was. I printed the statement, the fake authorization email, and my call log showing the time of our conversation. They slid into the growing HOA Brenda folder with a satisfying weight. That night, another email arrived. Second and final notice, lien processing scheduled. She'd shortened my 10 days to 3, apparently. Attached was a draft lien form, no attorney header, just a template she'd mangled with my parcel number typed in crooked. It was then I understood. She wasn't going to stop at harassment. She was trying to leverage paperwork into actual control over my land. And if she was willing to go that far on paper, I had no doubt she was already going further in person. That was the moment I stopped treating this like a neighbor spat and started treating it like what it really was, organized fraud wrapped in HOA stationery. If I didn't do something soon, she wouldn't just be renting my legacy out from under me. She'd be laying the groundwork to steal it. Drop a comment if you've ever had an HOA threaten you with fines or liens over nonsense, because that so-called final notice, that was the day I realized Brenda would keep pushing until someone pushed back harder. People think the turning point was that final notice email. It wasn't. The real shift happened about 20 seconds after I closed it. I sat there in my New York apartment, the city smeared in glass behind me, and realized I was slipping back into an old, very familiar skin. At the IRS, we had a phrase for this moment: stop reacting, start reconstructing. Up to that point, I'd been swatting at Brenda's nonsense as it hit my inbox, one bogus violation at a time. But a bill that tried to turn my family's land into collateral for her side hustle, that moved it out of annoying and straight into scheme. I put the printouts on my dining table, side by side. The violation notices, the fake lien, the email offering to work it off via occupancy, the lack of any actual policy. I grabbed a legal pad and drew 3 columns like I'd done 1,000 times. What they say, what they can prove, what they're hiding. Under what they say, I wrote Brenda's buzzwords: modernization, enforcement, community standards, authorized occupancy. Under what they can prove, I left a lot of empty space. Because here's the thing: real power leaves a paper trail on purpose. It wants to be seen. Scams avoid daylight. HOAs are boring by design: budgets, minutes, covenants, insurance riders. That boredom is exactly where people like Brenda hide. But to me, that stack of paperwork didn't look boring. It looked like a crime scene. I opened my laptop and pulled up the state's nonprofit corporation database. Our HOA was registered, which meant it had to file annual reports. I searched the name, pulled every document, and started reading. Officer list, registered agent, a 3-year gap where no financial summary had been uploaded. Sloppy, I murmured, or deliberate. Next, I logged into my email archive. Every HOA message for the last 10 years went into a search folder. I filtered by sender: old presidents, secretaries, then Brenda. Pattern popped instantly. The old board used the official HOA account, CC'd at least 2 people on anything involving money, and referenced actual bylaw sections. Brenda? Half her threats came from a free Gmail account with a cutesy username sent after midnight. No one else copied. I pulled up the original covenants again, read the enforcement section slowly, line by line, like I was back in a conference room grilling a tax director. Due process. Notice. Hearing before fines. Right to appeal. Requirement that all policies be adopted by formal vote and distributed to members. No mention, none, of temporary HOA-managed occupancy. No authority to place tenants. No right to barter property access for fees. So when she told me, "We don't send around private contracts, that's internal," what she really meant was, there are no contracts, just her, some keys, and enough community apathy to keep anyone from asking questions. That's when another old instinct kicked in. Follow the money, but secure the ground first. Trespassing law in Texas is not vague. I pulled up the statute, checked the requirements. Signage, prior notice documentation of unauthorized entry. Then I opened the photos I'd already taken on my last trip, the strange SUV, the laundry on my rail, the stranger in my kitchen. I backed them up to 2 cloud drives and an external hard drive, time-stamped and labeled. Brenda thought she was dangling a choice in front of me: play along with her fake occupancy program, or get buried in liens and gossip. What she didn't know was that by putting her offer in writing, she'd given me something much more useful than peace. She'd admitted motive. At that moment, I stopped being the widow with the old shed and became what I'd trained to be: the boring, relentless woman who could turn a shoebox of receipts into a federal case. I didn't slam my fists or fire off angry replies. I poured coffee, put on my reading glasses, and started drafting a list titled, very simply, Timeline of Fraud. And as I filled in the first dates, I knew exactly what came next. I was done reacting to Brenda's rules. From here on out, I was going to make her play by mine. I booked the next flight to Texas and landed with a carry-on full of files instead of clothes. On the drive out from the airport, I started my recorder and talked like I was debriefing a junior agent. Date, time, purpose of visit, verify unauthorized occupancy, document pattern of HOA abuse. Old habits die hard. First stop wasn't my driveway. It was the county clerk's office. I pulled the HOA's filings, copies of every lien they'd ever actually recorded. There were only 2 in 10 years, both before Brenda. Nothing remotely like the half-baked form she'd emailed me. I paid cash for certified copies and slipped them into my folder. Next, I asked for subdivision plats and our original declaration of covenants. The clerk handed over a dog-eared packet. I'd seen it before, but this time I was reading it like evidence. Highlight: enforcement actions must be approved by a majority of the board at a meeting with minutes kept and made available to members upon request, which meant every fine on that statement needed a paper trail. I was willing to bet good money it didn't exist. Only then did I drive through the community gate. I paused at the mailboxes long enough to photograph the bulletin board, every notice, and the list of current board members with Brenda's name double-stamped on it. A neighbor in a pickup slowed, gave me a wary nod. I made a note of his plates and the time anyway. When I crested the last hill before my place, my jaw tightened. Same strange SUV, same kids' bikes in the dirt, a cheap plastic kiddie pool in the yard now, half full of murky water. Someone had hung a blanket over my front window like a makeshift curtain. I didn't march up to the door. I parked by the barn. The padlock on my tool shed had been replaced with a shiny new one. I took close-up photos, then zoomed in on the hinges, fresh scratches, bright metal. Whoever swapped, it wasn't subtle. Or they thought nobody would ever look. Inside the barn, feed bags I'd stacked neatly months ago were torn open and half used. There were fresh hoof prints in the dust that weren't from my horses, too small, different shoe pattern. Someone had been boarding animals, too. I photographed everything. Boot prints, beer cans in the corner with readable barcodes, a Walmart receipt crumpled near the tack room. The date on it was last week. I smoothed it out, took a picture, then slid it into a Ziploc bag like it was evidence from a crime scene. When I circled back toward the house, a teenage girl stepped out onto my porch with a laundry basket. She froze when she saw me, eyes wide. "Hola," I said gently, keeping my hands visible. "I'm Eleanor. This is my house." Her eyes filled with panic. "La señora, Brenda, dice que es casa de familia. Que está bien?" "The Lady Brenda says it's family house." "It's okay." I felt that twist in my chest again. Anger, yes, but not at her, at the woman hiding behind her. "Está bien," I said softly. "No es tu culpa. Voy a arreglar esto." "It's not your fault. I'll fix this." I backed away, making sure my dash cam had a clear view of the porch, and got into my truck. I dictated everything I'd just heard into my phone, exact words, time, description, verbal evidence, backed by video. Back at Carla's kitchen table, we spread everything out. Notices, screenshots she'd saved, the final notice, email, my photos, the certified records from the clerk. "You gonna lawyer up?" she asked. "Eventually," I said, "but first I'm going to do what I do best, reconcile stories against documents." We made a list of every house people had seen activity at despite being listed vacant. McAllister Place, Old Dairy Farm, the Harper's Cabin. For each one, I noted dates, types of cars, any names people had overheard. Then I cross-referenced that with county records. No leases, no sales, no filings. Just Brenda's keys and her word. That night, I sat at my old oak table with a pot of coffee and opened the HOA's bare-bones budget from 3 years ago, the last one the old board had emailed out. I built my own spreadsheet. Line items then, line items now from Brenda's one summary she'd ever shared in a group email. Security tripled. Administrative reimbursements doubled. No line for rental income, which, if she was running anything even vaguely legitimate, should have shown up somewhere. I circled every discrepancy in red. Then I drafted a calm, meticulous email to the official HOA address, CCing the registered agent from the state filings. Subject: Formal document request under covenants section 12. I listed numbered every record I wanted: minutes, fine schedules, policies, copies of any occupancy agreements, invoices for security, bank statements for the HOA account for the last 3 years. I ended it with, failure to provide these within the time frame specified in the covenants will be treated as a denial of access and noted accordingly in any future legal or regulatory proceedings. Brenda would read that as empty bluster from a pissed-off landowner. What it really was a foundation. I was creating a clear record that I had requested transparency, and she had refused. Over the next 48 hours, I kept moving. Photos of the guard shack, empty, as usual, despite the fat budget line. Video of the gate that now malfunctioned every other car, while maintenance fees climbed. Statements from 2 more neighbors who quietly admitted they'd been offered rent credits if they'd let HOA-approved families use their places. Every artifact went into the folder, scanned and backed up twice. Physical copy in my fireproof box, digital copy in the cloud, second digital on an encrypted drive I kept in my purse. Because I wasn't just building a complaint. I was building a case any cop, DA, or regulator could walk into cold and understand in 10 minutes. And there was only one piece missing. I needed Brenda to put her greed and entitlement on full display in a way I could capture and that she could never explain away as a misunderstanding. So I sat back, looked at my growing timeline of fraud, and started planning how to hand her the perfect chance to step even deeper into her own trap. Before I tell you how I dangled that bait in front of her, make sure you're subscribed, because from this point on I stopped waiting for Brenda to make mistakes and started arranging them for her. I didn't need Brenda to confess. I needed her to overplay her hand where I could see it. So I gave her the perfect opportunity. 2 days after I walked the property, I sent a short, shaky-sounding email to her personal Gmail. Subject: temporary access option. Hi, Brenda. I've thought about what you said. I can't afford a lien or lawyer. If there's still a way to clear the balance using the approved tenant thing, I'm willing to consider it. But I need to know exactly what you have in mind before I fly back to New York. Ellie. I hit send and set my phone on the table. I didn't have to wait long. 7 minutes later. Knew you'd come around. Smiley face. Call me. I did. On speaker with my recorder running. She launched right in. Okay, so here's what we'll do. I've already got a family in there, so that part's handled. They're good people, relatives of mine, but, they don't do paperwork, so it's easier if I keep it off the official books. Off the official books. I wrote it down as she said it. So she continued, you reply to that email, I agree. I'll consider your account settled in, say, 3 months, as long as you don't cause scenes or call the sheriff about trespassing. After that, we can transition the arrangement, maybe even extend it if we both like how it's working. Will there be a lease? I asked. She actually snorted. Ellie, this is neighbor stuff. Paperwork just complicates things. You give me cover with the HOA if anyone asks. I keep your name out of any enforcement. And you get your balance wiped without cutting a check. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. You won't tell anyone they're there. Because of me? I pressed, soft. Of course not. Officially, it's an HOA security placement. We do this all the time with vacant houses. You'll look like a team player. Everybody wins. Everybody wins. Except the owners who had no idea their homes were being run as Brenda's private Airbnb. When we hung up, I had exactly what I needed. Her voice connecting my debts to her relatives, admitting it wasn't authorized, and tying it to a broader pattern. But I wanted her arrogance on paper, too. I replied to her Gmail. Per our call, You said my account will be considered settled in 3 months if I don't report the family currently occupying my home, and I agree to HOA security placements being kept off the official books. Please confirm. She should have left it there. Any halfway trained crook would have stopped. Instead, 10 minutes later, her answer popped up. Yes, that's what I said. Don't worry about the technical stuff. This is just between us. I'll take care of the board. Just don't cause drama, or we have to go by the rules. Winky face. Between us. Off the books. Don't go by the rules. I printed the email chain and slid it into the folder, right after a fresh set of photos I'd taken that morning. Her cousin washing my truck in my driveway, kids splashing in that filthy kiddie pool, my husband's ranch coat still hanging over a chair on my porch. The bait was set, but I tightened it. I drafted one more message, this time to the official HOA account, CCing the registered agent and blind copying myself at a separate address. Dear Board, this is to confirm that I have been informed by President Morales that a family is currently occupying my residence under a so-called temporary HOA security placement tied to my alleged fines. I have not signed any lease, seen any policy authorizing such use, or received any board-approved documentation. I am concerned this arrangement may expose the association and me to liability. Please send within 5 days copies of 1. Any policy authorizing HOA-managed occupancy. 2. Any board minutes approving such programs. And 3. Any agreements relating to the current occupants of my property. If this program does not, in fact, exist, please treat this email as formal notice that any individuals currently on my land are trespassing without my consent. I reread it, checked every word, then hit send. If there really was a policy, they'd have to show it. If there wasn't, they'd either ignore me or, better, Brenda would try to shut me up. Her reply arrived that night from her Gmail, not the HOA address. Ellie, you're overthinking this. Stop putting things in writing that make trouble. Like I said, cooperate and you'll be fine. Start throwing around words like trespassing, and I can't protect you when the board votes on enforcement. Let's just keep this informal. See you at the emergency meeting next week. We'll clarify everything then. Emergency meeting. Unannounced, conveniently timed for the 1 week I'd happened to be in town. She thought she was summoning me to be scolded into line. What she didn't know was that by calling that meeting, she'd just given me a public stage, a captive audience, and a perfect documented moment to spring every single piece of her own greed back on her. When they posted the little paper notice at the mailboxes about an emergency HOA session to discuss ongoing compliance issues, I took a photo, smiled to myself, and circled the date in red on my kitchen calendar. Because when Brenda walked into that room, she wouldn't just be the president. She'd be the star witness in her own takedown. The emergency meeting was in the little cinder block pavilion by the mailboxes, the same place we used to hold potlucks before Brenda turned it into her throne room. By the time I got there, trucks and SUVs were already lined up along the dirt road. A few neighbors clustered by the door, arms folded, muttering. On the folding table inside sat a chipped coffee urn, a stack of agendas, and Brenda's laptop like a crown jewel. She swept in 5 minutes late, neon tennis set bright under the fluorescent lights. Okay, folks, let's get started, she sang. We've had some compliance issues, especially with certain absentee owners who don't understand how HOAs work. Her eyes flicked to me. I smiled back, small and polite, my folder resting on my lap. She clicked her laptop. First item, unauthorized structures, trash, and, problematic occupants. We're going to talk about how the board, she gestured to herself, has been forced to act. Some people have even thrown around words like trespassing. A few heads turned my way. Before we go there, I said, voice mild, could we confirm who the board is? She rolled her eyes. Ellie, everyone knows. I'm president and acting treasurer. Secretary is vacant until the next election. We've covered this. I nodded. So, you're the one who issues fines, approves security placements, and manages the bank account. Someone has to do the work, she shot back. Now, about these rumors. I stood up slowly. They're not rumors. I set my folder on the table, opened it, and laid out 3 sheets in front of her like I was setting down playing cards. First, I said, tapping the draft lien she'd emailed me, is a lien form that doesn't match any of the 2 actual liens this HOA has ever filed with the county. Those, I held up certified copies, have board signatures and council review. This one has your name in Microsoft Word font, and no attorney anywhere near it. A murmur rippled through the room. Second, I continued, sliding over the temporary access email chain. Is you offering to consider my account settled if I agreed not to report the family currently living in my house, and if I agreed to let you keep all security placements off the official books? In writing, I read her own words aloud, off the official books. This is just between us. I'll take care of the board. Someone in the back muttered, "What the hell?" Brenda's face flushed. "You're taking that out of context. I was trying to help you. You're behind." Third, I said over her, calm as a metronome, is the HOA covenant section that says any fine, lien, or enforcement action must be approved by a majority of the board in a meeting with minutes available to members upon request. I held up another sheet, and here is my formal document request from last week, which you ignored. I turned to the room. Has anyone here seen minutes for the last 3 years? Heads shook. Carla raised a hand. She told me financials were internal. And yet, I said, picking up my next sheet, the state nonprofit filings show this HOA is required to keep accurate books and provide them to members. I pulled the last honest budget. You all got under the old board. I projected a copy from my tablet onto the wall with a little portable projector I brought. Old habit. This is then security at $3,000 a year, admin stipends at $2,400. Click. New slide. This is now security at $9,000, administrative reimbursements at $7,200. No line whatsoever for rental income, despite multiple families occupying vacant properties. I let that hang. A rancher near the door spoke up. You told me, Brenda, that the people at the Harper place were HOA security, and it was none of my business. Another neighbor. You offered to work off my fines if I let your cousin stay at my cabin. Said we didn't need to drag lawyers into neighbor stuff. Brenda's composure cracked. You all wanted enforcement. You complained about junky lots, crime. I stepped up. These placements are creative solutions. I get a small stipend for all the extra work. That's it. I clicked my recorder on the table. Her own voice played into the mic. They're good people, relatives of mine. It's easier if I keep it off the official books. Paperwork just complicates things. You give me cover with the HOA. I keep your name out of enforcement. Silence. Someone cursed under their breath. You recorded me? She hissed. In Texas, one-party consent. I replied. Also that. I nodded toward the speaker. Isn't me? That's the president of a nonprofit admitting she's using HOA access to run personal rentals, threatening liens with fake paperwork, and bartering enforcement for silence. Her jaw clenched. You think anyone cares? This is a rural HOA. Sheriff has better things to do. Outside, right on cue, I heard tires crunch on gravel. 2 county cruisers rolled past the window, dust pluming behind them. Brenda's eyes flicked toward the door. What did you do? I filed a trespassing report, I said evenly, with photos, timestamps, statements from your own tenants, and copies of every email you sent me. I also gave the deputy a summary of your off-the-books rental program and the HOA's missing financials. They've been very interested. The pavilion door opened. Deputy Morales, no relation, stepped in, hat in hand. "Afternoon, folks. President Morales?" he asked, eyes scanning the room. Brenda straightened, plastering on a smile. "Yes, Deputy, we're in a private HOA meeting, so if you could—" He held up a folded paper. "Ma'am, we've got multiple complaints of unauthorized occupancy, possible fraud, and misuse of HOA authority. We're going to need to talk to you outside. Now," she laughed, high and brittle, "you can't just barge in here because some bitter old landowner is mad about fines. I'm the president. I decide who's trespassing." "Actually," I said, sliding one last document across the table, "this is the deed to my farm. My name, not yours, not the HOA's. And per the email I sent the board 3 days ago, any individuals on my land without a lease or my consent are legally trespassers. The folks currently living in my house told me on camera that Senora Brenda said it was a family house and there was no paperwork. I've given those statements to the deputy." He nodded. "We've already been out there, ma'am," he told the room. "Confirmed there's no lease, no authorization from the owner. The occupants cooperated. They're being relocated with social services. Right now, we're here for President Morales." Color drained from her face. "You went to that house without clearing it with me?" "It's not your house," I said quietly. "And this isn't your fiefdom. It's a nonprofit corporation subject to state law, tax rules, and criminal statutes you've been trampling in tennis shoes." The deputy stepped closer. "Brenda Morales, you're not under arrest at this moment, but you are being detained for questioning regarding potential criminal trespass, fraud, and misuse of fiduciary duty. You can come with us calmly, or—" He let it trail off. She looked around for allies and found only a ring of hard, betrayed faces. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "She's twisting everything. You all wanted me to fix this place, and now—" "No," Carla cut in, voice shaking but loud. "We wanted someone to mow the easements and send real budgets, not to move your cousins into our homes and threaten us if we talked." Brenda opened her mouth, closed it, then jerked her arm away as the deputy lightly took her elbow. "You're going to regret this, Ellie," she spat over her shoulder as he guided her toward the door. "You think you're so smart with your papers." I met her eyes. I didn't raise my voice. "Brenda," I said, "I raised a case." The door swung shut behind them, leaving the room buzzing, hollow, and stunned. But exposing her in public was only the beginning. The real damage to her little empire was still on its way, and it was headed straight for the two places she cared about most, her bank account and her title. Before I tell you how the fallout reshaped the entire HOA and what happened to every single one of Brenda's fake rules and side deals, drop a comment if you've ever watched someone in power get taken down by their own paperwork, because what came next hit her where it really hurts. In the stunned quiet after the door closed behind Brenda and the deputy, you could almost hear the dust settling. Nobody moved at first. Then old Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. "So, what now?" he asked, looking straight at me, not at the empty spot where Brenda's laptop still glowed. What now was procedure. I slid her computer toward the middle of the table, careful not to touch the keys. "First," I said, "nobody logs into this. It's evidence. Second, your bylaws say if the president is unable to serve, the remaining board members can appoint an interim. Since your board is currently a one-woman show, that means the members in this room can and should call for an emergency election." Carla blinked. "Can we do that? Just right now?" I flipped to the relevant page, tapped it. Right here. Majority of owners present. Quorum is 10%. By my count, we're well over that, unless anyone objects. No one did. In fact, I saw faces harden with something like relief. Within 15 minutes, with handwritten ballots on notebook paper, The community did what it should have done years earlier. It took the keys back. Jenkins agreed to be temporary president. Carla volunteered as secretary. A quiet, serious man named Luis, bookkeeper for a feed company, stepped up as treasurer. "Congratulations," I said dryly. "You just inherited a mess." Luis glanced at my bulging folder. "Looks like we also inherited an auditor." "I'm retired," I answered, "but I hate sloppy books. I'm willing to help, unofficially, if you're willing to do this in the open. Full copies of everything to every owner. Real meetings. Real minutes." Heads nodded. The spell Brenda had cast of apathy and confusion was breaking in real time. The next 48 hours were busy. The deputies searched Brenda's office closet and left with 2 plastic bins of paper, half-signed forms, cash receipt books, envelopes of crumpled money clips labeled with addresses that weren't hers. They photographed her home printer, her stacks of blank lien templates. The sheriff's investigator asked me to walk him through my timeline. I did, methodically, like I'd done for federal attorneys. Meanwhile, the new board called an official meeting, this time properly noticed. We met in broad daylight, doors open, coffee actually hot. They passed a motion suspending all fines and enforcement actions issued in the last 3 years pending review. Another motion revoked any so-called temporary occupancy authority that had never existed in the first place. I watched shoulders literally drop around the room as people realized the letters that had been keeping them up at night were, at least for now, toothless. We spent hours reconstructing what Brenda had done. Luis and I went line by line through the HOA bank statements the credit union faxed over, security payments that went straight to a card in her name, admin reimbursements that matched charges at Target and a spa in town. Not a single deposit that looked like rental income, despite the families who'd been living on other people's land. "This isn't just bad bookkeeping," Luis said quietly. "This is theft. Embezzlement, if a DA wants to get fancy," I replied. "And tax fraud. She's been taking in cash, not reporting it to the HOA or the IRS. I've already drafted a memo for the county attorney and the state AG's consumer division. Once you, as the new board, sign off, it goes out certified." Jenkins rubbed his temples. "She's going to hate you for this. Ellie." "She already does," I said. "You're not doing this to spite her. You're doing it to protect yourselves. If you don't formally disavow what she did, the HOA is on the hook right alongside her." The board voted unanimously to cooperate with every investigation, to freeze Brenda's access to accounts, to notify the membership in writing about what had happened. No more whispers, no more bulletin board innuendo. Just facts. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at my New York apartment from the sheriff's office. Inside was a polite letter, charges recommended, criminal trespass in multiple counts, fraud, misapplication of fiduciary property. The DA was convening a grand jury. Another envelope, this one from the new HOA, held a different kind of closure, a clean ledger with my name, balance zeroed. A note signed by all 3 board members. All prior fines and liens issued under former President Morales have been voided as unauthorized. We apologize for the stress this caused you and thank you for helping us uncover the abuse. I read it twice, then pinned it to my fridge like a small, boring trophy. Back at the farm a month later, the house was mine again, quiet, a little dusty, but intact. The cousins Brenda had dumped there were safely in a church program in town. I'd made sure of that. They'd been pawns, not villains. Carla and Jenkins walked my fence line with me, listening as I talked them through a new set of policies, real rental rules, trespass protocols, automatic financial disclosures. Rules are tools, I told them. In the wrong hands, they become weapons. So we're going to write them in a way that they can only ever point at the problem, not the people trying to live their lives. By the time the sun slid behind the mesquite, the community had something it hadn't had in years, structure that served the owners, not the ego in the tennis outfit. From that day on, threat letters stopped. The guard shack got staffed. Budgets hit inboxes on time. And when someone heard Brenda's name around town, it wasn't followed by president anymore. It was followed by indicted. Hit the like button if you think more HOAs need someone willing to read the fine print, because after Brenda, this place finally understood. You don't beat abuse with bigger drama. You beat it with better paperwork and consequences that actually stick. Time has a way of settling over a place once the shouting stops. The next time I flew in from New York and turned off the highway, my porch was dark again, the way it was meant to be. No strange SUV, no laundry flapping on my rail, no kiddie pool in the yard. Just crickets, one porch light I flipped on myself, and that old ranch coat of my husband's, back where it belonged because I'd put it there. Inside, the house smelled like dust and lemon oil. The new board had sent a cleaner through after the cousins moved out, but they'd left the things that mattered. Photos on the mantel, his boots by the door. I walked room to room, hand on the walls like I was taking inventory of what I'd almost let someone steal. Out at the mailboxes, the bulletin board looked different too. No anonymous threats about problem owners. No vague notices about placements. Instead, there were real agendas, signed minutes, a printed budget with every line item spelled out. Under security, Louise had written in tiny parentheses, actual guards, not cousins. Neighbors looked me in the eye again. The ranch hand who'd hesitated before raised a hand and said, "Morning, Mrs. Vance." Carla joked that our HOA meetings had gotten so popular they might need more chairs. When people argued now, it was about real things, gravel maintenance, water pressure, not about whatever story Brenda wanted them to believe that week. Every so often, someone would ask quietly, "You hear anything about the case?" I'd nod. They'd heard pieces, how the DA took it seriously, how the IRS had opened a file once they saw the rental cash and fake reimbursements. A few folks looked guilty, like they'd been part of her little empire just by not asking questions. I'm not proud we let her get that far. Jenkins told me one evening as we watched the sun go down over the pastures. We saw the neon and the SUV and thought, she must know what she's doing. She did, I said, just not for you. We wrote new rules together, short, plain English with teeth pointing the right way. Automatic disclosure of financials. Hard limits on what any one officer could do alone. A bright, bold clause that said, the HOA has no right to occupy, rent, or barter member property. Period. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a lifetime of being the auditor in someone else's story, I'd become the boring lady at the back of the room, reminding everybody to keep their receipts. On my last night of that season, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee, watching the sky go indigo over the mesquite. Somewhere down the road, a gate clicked as a neighbor came home. No one slowed to stare at my driveway anymore. There was nothing to gossip about, just a farm, a widow, and a community that had finally remembered who it belonged to. People think the satisfying part was seeing Brenda led out of that pavilion with a deputy at her elbow. I won't lie, that was memorable. But the real satisfaction came later, in the quiet things, a balance sheet that added up, a notice that said, "Thank you," instead of final warning, a neighbor who knew they could knock on my door instead of whispering by the mailboxes. Rules are tools. In the wrong hands, they're weapons. So I took them back, not just for me, but for everyone who'd been too tired or too scared to fight. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's currently appearing on your screen.